Okay, I'm going to try to show you guys two shotguns that are vintage, that are very nearly alike, but one is an English gun and one is a US made gun. Both made in what we would consider the golden age of shotgun manufacturing, which would be between 1890 and 1940, about 50 years in there. The one closest to me is a Parker GH grade. And the other one is a W&C Scott made in London, England. And the reason I chose these two guns is because they're very similar in quality. So the GH grade, Parker closest to me, would be one grade up from what we would call a blue collar gun. So it was a little nicer grade. You can see it's got some engraving. It's actually got a game scene engraving on the bottom. And the screw heads are engraved, and there's the serial number, which will tell you that that gun was made about 1898. And this gun has English scroll engraving, and trigger guards are engraved. There's the serial number. This gun was made in 1907. Now, another interesting thing is they both have what we call an Anson and Dealey fore-end latch with a fore-end tip. And this is what a Parker looks like. There's a fore-end tip. There's the Anson and Dealey latch. They also both have Damascus barrels. This is what the Parker Damascus barrels look like. And this is what the W&C Scott Damascus barrels look like. These guns are both in original condition, except for one thing. Now, if I go back here to the back, and one thing we look for is screw heads. Screws that aren't buggered up from somebody with a screwdriver trying to turn them open, especially a screwdriver that doesn't fit. This gun here has game scenes engraving on the side. It's got really good screw heads. But it has what we would call the original dog's head butt plate that Parker put on their guns, with what we also call a widow's peak. Turn this here in the light so you can see what I mean. Right there. Widow's peak in the butt plate. The W&C Scott. Okay, the other thing I got to show you here real quick. They both have a shield on the stock that is meant to have your initials engraved in it, if you so choose. Now, the W&C Scott, being an English gun, is only chambered for 2.5-inch cartridges, which you can't buy here in the United States unless you buy English cartridges or go someplace like RST in Pennsylvania or Reload. They've got short chambers. And that's why they could make their guns a little bit lighter. This gun is about 6 pounds. The average 12 gauge should weigh about 7 pounds, or the recoil gets to be too much. But the English guns could have a little lighter gun, a little handier gun, because they shot 2.5-inch cartridges. Typically, the average 12 gauge in the US is going to weigh about 7 pounds roughly, give or take a few ounces. The average 20 gauge is going to weigh about 6 pounds, and the average 10 gauge is going to weigh about 8.5 to 9 pounds, and that way the recoil doesn't get to be too much for you. There is one thing I have to show you here that is interesting, that makes one gun a much easier gun to resell than the other. The W&C Scott has never had the barrels cut. It's got, see how the barrels are touching on the end? Whereas if you look at the Parker, you can see a space between the barrels, even though that's filled in with silver solder. That's an almost sure sign that a gun has been cut. So even though it's got 30-inch barrels and they're full, I think in both barrels that one is, the fact that the barrels have been cut really kind of hurts the resale of it. Now, Another thing I got to show you here is checkering. On the W&C Scott, you can see the checkering is pretty good. Now the American-made guns were pretty much what they call flat top checkering, which that's what this looks like. But the checkering is really worn. Typically that wouldn't hurt it too much as far as a collector gun. The forend almost has no checkering left. But because this gun has had the barrels cut, I'm going to have the checkering recut on the stock and the forend. And I'm going to have to do something about this dark. American guns were made from American walnut that's not really dark like that. And that's from oil soaking. Over 100 years of somebody oiling their gun, probably touching the stock after they oiled it, setting it in the cabinet with the butt down and the muzzle up. That stock takes on the color of the oil, so you can't sand it because the stock and the metal are pretty even. And if you sand this at all, you'll end up having your metal proud to the wood, and that's one thing you really don't want. That's a big no-no. So the way to get that out of there is you take the stock off and the forend wood, and you can soak it in acetane, and then you can clean it up, sand it lightly maybe, and have the checkering recut, and then oil it back with boiled linseed oil. It takes quite a few coats to get it to look nice. Some of these here dings in the stock, that's called age appropriate marks. So I would call that age appropriate. So every once in a while we run into a gun called a Frankenstein gun. So you see there the serial numbers on the forend, and they match the serial numbers on the gun and on the trigger guard. But there's supposed to be serial numbers on the barrel flats, and that's right there, and I don't see any. What a Frankenstein gun is a gun that has been put together from a couple of guns put together. Maybe the barrels are off of something else. See, if you see this W&C Scott now, it's got the serial numbers right there on the barrel, right there on the forend, right there on the gun, on the water table. That proves that it's what we call a numbers matching gun, and that makes a gun worth a lot more money. You take a gun like this that we would call at least a possible Frankenstein gun, and I'm having trouble here trying to prove it because these barrels don't have a serial number. So they're supposed to be there, and that makes me suspicious. So unless I can find the serial numbers on the barrels, I can't ever resell that gun as a numbers matching gun. So that's the story on that. But you can see the oil soaking there in the forend. See that black look? That'll come out if you soak that in acetane, and then try not to sand it. If you sand it, you see how the wood and metal fit together so nice there? You start sanding on that, all of a sudden your wood will be smaller than your metal, and nobody's going to like that very good. Now the reason I have these two guns in the shop today, besides I really wanted to show them to you, vintage doubles are very much a passion of mine, and I brought them in here to make some patterns for some hunting dog theme gun sleeves that I'm making for them, so that whenever I ship a gun out, I have a nice cloth sleeve to put it in. Typically this is how we would package them, with the barrels and the forend attached like that, and then the stock separately, and a nice gun sleeve on there, keep the stock from getting dinged up anymore. And one of the things I have to say about dings in the stock is I kind of like that. It tells you that the gun has character and it's been used, and it's got stories. And even though you're never going to know the stories, they're a mystery. They're a mystery that we find very intriguing. Who had these guns? Who loved these guns? How many generations of people have used these guns? What all have they seen? What all have they done? They've all come through the Great Depression. They've come through 2 world wars. And they probably may have belonged to a family and stayed in a family. Or they may have been passed around. That's all stuff we would like to know but don't get to. It's fun to imagine.